On May 2, 1945, with just a few days remaining before the official end of World War II in Europe, the Battle of Berlin had finally come to a conclusion. Over 10 days of intense urban combat, coupled with years of relentless bombardment, had left Berlin in a state of utter devastation. Since the first bombing raid in June 1940 until the final air attack in April 1945, the Allies dropped a staggering 68,000 tons of explosives on Berlin. This destructive force was equivalent to the power of 4 atomic bombs, like the one dropped on Hiroshima. The bombardment, combined with the ferocity of the Soviet ground assault, transformed Berlin into a landscape of ruins and rubble, leaving the once vibrant city in shambles. Soviet General Nikolai Berzarin, the first commander to assume control over Berlin's governance after the battle, immediately implemented measures to dismantle any remaining German political structures. He ordered the confiscation of all weapons, cameras, radios, and vehicles from Berliners to prevent any form of resistance or unauthorized communication. Berzarin's immediate priorities were clear and pressing: to secure the food supply for the starving population, to reopen medical facilities to care for the wounded and prevent epidemics, to provide shelter for the countless refugees, and to clear the city streets of the mountains of debris. Concurrently, efforts were also made to restore essential services like water and electricity, which had been obliterated during the conflict. Historian Antony Beevor notes that Berlin's population, which had been over 3.5 million in 1940, had dwindled to about 2 million by May 1945. This number included not only the remaining residents but also the waves of refugees pouring into the city from surrounding areas. Although the end of the war meant an end to the bombings and the fighting, Berliners faced a new and grueling ordeal. Looting and rapes, which had already been occurring during the battle, surged dramatically in the aftermath. Despite official prohibitions against such acts, there was a notable tolerance from Berzarin and the Soviet High Command, who viewed it as a form of retribution for the immense suffering their soldiers had endured during the war. The streets of Berlin were littered with the unburied dead, creating an overwhelming stench that hung over the city for months. A significant effort was made to bury the corpses of civilians and soldiers alike in mass graves, but the task was enormous and slow-moving. In the initial weeks following the battle, disease spread rapidly due to poor sanitary conditions, severe food shortages, and a lack of medical care. Many Berliners, injured during the fighting, succumbed to conditions that would not have been fatal under normal circumstances. Pneumonia, influenza, tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid fever, and dysentery were rampant, exacerbated by the overcrowded and unsanitary living conditions. The city's infrastructure was in shambles, with trains, trams, canals, and bridges destroyed or obstructed, severely hampering the delivery of vital supplies. Addressing this was a top priority, and tens of thousands of Berliners, both voluntarily and compulsorily, participated in the massive cleanup and repair efforts. By the third week of May, significant progress had been made in clearing the streets, and by June, the first commuter trains and trams began operating again, facilitating the flow of essential materials and food into the city. Housing posed a significant challenge. With 2/3 of Berlin's housing destroyed and the remaining third often in poor condition, the city faced a severe shortage of habitable space. The influx of refugees exacerbated this problem. Makeshift shelters were set up, multiple families were crammed into the few intact apartments, and some refugees were diverted from entering the city to alleviate the strain. Resolving the housing crisis was a long-term challenge that persisted well beyond the immediate aftermath of the war. Many families lived in overcrowded conditions, and improvised dwellings sprang up in the least damaged areas of the city. These makeshift accommodations were often flimsy and inadequate, providing little protection from the elements and contributing to the spread of illness. To manage the severe food shortages, the Soviets introduced ration cards, continuing a system already in place under the Germans. These cards divided the population into 3 levels, determining their food allocation based on rank and occupation. However, actual food distribution often fell short of the allocations due to supply constraints. Initially, Berliners relied on the remaining German stockpiles until new supplies could be brought in. Berliners were encouraged to plant vegetables in every available space throughout the city, creating small urban gardens to supplement their food supply. Public parks, private gardens, and even bomb craters were transformed into makeshift farms. This initiative not only helped alleviate food shortages but also provided a psychological boost to the beleaguered population, fostering a sense of community and self-reliance. The black market thrived in this desperate environment. Berliners traded whatever valuables they had left, such as jewelry, musical instruments, paintings, and carpets, for food and other essentials, often dealing with both Soviet and American soldiers. In some cases, women were forced to use their bodies as currency to obtain food and other necessities, a grim testament to the dire conditions they faced. The black market became a lifeline for many, allowing them to procure items that were otherwise unavailable through official channels. However, this underground economy was fraught with dangers, including the risk of exploitation and violence. Amid the struggle for survival, cultural and social life in Berlin underwent a transformation. Theaters, cinemas, and other entertainment venues were largely destroyed or repurposed for more urgent needs. Nonetheless, Berliners sought ways to preserve their cultural heritage and maintain a semblance of normalcy. Small, impromptu performances and gatherings took place in whatever spaces were available, providing a temporary escape from the harsh realities of post-war life. These events were a testament to the resilience and spirit of the city's inhabitants. The rebuilding of Berlin required not only physical reconstruction but also psychological healing. The war had left deep scars on the population, and many individuals suffered from trauma and grief. Mental health care was virtually non-existent, and people relied heavily on community support and informal networks to cope with their experiences. The process of coming to terms with the past and rebuilding lives was a slow and painful journey. This was the harsh reality of life in Berlin in the immediate aftermath of the war. Despite these hardships, the resilience of the Berliners and the gradual restoration of basic services marked the beginning of a slow recovery. Over time, as months passed, the city's infrastructure and daily life started to stabilize, paving the way for Berlin's eventual reconstruction and renewal. The city's residents faced monumental challenges, but their determination and resourcefulness enabled them to gradually rebuild their homes, their communities, and their lives. The story of Berlin's recovery is a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity.